the 13th of October 1988, a date that was supposed to end the debate forever. In a packed room at the British Museum, the announcement wasn't just made, it was delivered like a coroner's verdict. The Shroud of Turin, the faint, haunting image of a crucified man that millions believed was the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, was officially declared a fraud. The headlines didn't mince words. They screamed medieval forgery. The science was absolute. The radiocarbon dating, the gold standard of atomic physics, had spoken. It placed the creation of the cloth between the years 1260 and 1390. Case closed. The world moved on. But what if the verdict was wrong? Not just slightly off, but fundamentally, catastrophically flawed? What if the science was accurate, but the specific piece of fabric they tested was a lie? Over the last few decades, a quiet revolution has been taking place in laboratories around the world. We are talking about a pile of evidence that suggests the 1988 test didn't date the original shroud at all, but rather a masterfully woven repair patch added more than 1,000 years after the death of Christ. This is the story of a flawed sample, hidden data, and a new wave of technology that is forcing us to rewrite the history of the world's most controversial artifact. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to the moment the world thought the mystery was solved. The year is 1988. The atmosphere is electric. The Vatican, after centuries of protectiveness, finally agrees to let science take the wheel. They authorize a radiocarbon dating test. The logic is simple. Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope found in every living thing. When an organism dies, like the flax plant used to weave linen, it stops absorbing carbon. That carbon then decays at a fixed, predictable rate. It is an atomic clock. By measuring what's left, you can pinpoint the moment of death. The protocol was rigorous. A postage stamp-sized strip of linen was cut from the corner of the 14-foot cloth. This wasn't done in secret. It was done under the watchful eyes of experts and cameras. That single strip was then divided and rushed to 3 of the most prestigious laboratories on the planet: the University of Arizona, Oxford University, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. These labs were the heavy hitters. They were tasked with running independent blind tests to ensure no single error could skew the results. Months of silence followed. The world waited. Then came the press conference. The results from all 3 labs were remarkably, devastatingly consistent. They stated with 95% certainty that the flax was harvested in the Middle Ages, specifically between 1260 and 1390. It was a perfect match for the first undisputed historical record of the shroud in Liray, France, around 1357. The conclusion was inescapable. The image, with its photographic negative qualities, its anatomical precision of a Roman crucifixion, was just a clever trick by a medieval artist. For the scientific community, it was a triumph of empiricism over superstition. For the faithful, it was a gut punch. But even as the champagne corks were popping in the labs, a few sharp-eyed researchers were looking at that corner of the cloth and asking a dangerous question. Are we sure that piece is the same as the rest? This brings us to the invisible patch theory. To understand this, you have to visualize the brutal history of the cloth itself. It hasn't just been sitting in a museum case for 2,000 years. It has survived wars, travel, and fire. Specifically, the fire of 1,532 inches, the Chapel of Chambéry. The silver casket holding the folded shroud was superheated by the inferno. Molten silver dripped onto the linen, burning through the folded layers like acid. The damage was catastrophic. 2 years later, in 1534, the Poor Clare nuns were tasked with repairing it. They didn't just stitch it up. They performed a miracle of textile surgery. There is a technique known as invisible reweaving. In the hands of a master, new threads are woven into the old fabric so seamlessly that the naked eye cannot tell where the old ends and the new begins. The theory is that the corner sample cut in 1988, the one used to prove it was a fake, came from a section that had been repaired during the medieval period. If this is true, the scientists in 1988 weren't dating the Shroud of Jesus. They were dating a patch sewn by a nun in the 1500s. This isn't just wishful thinking. It is backed by hard chemistry. Enter Dr. Raymond Rogers. Rogers wasn't a starry-eyed believer. He was a chemist from the Los Alamos National Laboratory and a member of the original 1978 research team. Initially, he defended the 1988 carbon dating, but he was a scientist first. He decided to re-examine the leftover threads from that specific sample area. His findings, published in the peer-reviewed journal Thermochimica Acta in 2005, shattered the consensus. Rogers put the fibers under the microscope and found something that shouldn't be there: cotton. The main body of the shroud is pure linen, but the sample area, it was interwoven with cotton fibers. That is a massive red flag. But he went deeper. He found that the fibers in the sample area were coated with a specific plant gum and a reddish dye. Rogers argued this was a medieval dye technology used to artificially yellow the new threads so they would match the ancient, aged color of the original cloth. And here is the kicker. That specific dye technology didn't appear in Europe until around 1291 AD. That date aligns perfectly with the carbon dating results. Rogers effectively proved that the labs were right about the date of the sample, but the sample was a foreign object. He didn't stop there. He looked for vanillin. Vanillin is a compound found in the lignin of flax plants. Over time, under the influence of heat and age, vanillin decomposes and disappears. It's like a chemical battery that slowly drains. Rogers tested threads from the main body of the shroud and found absolutely zero vanillin. The battery was dead, implying the cloth was very, very old. But when he tested the radiocarbon sample, the vanillin was still there. It registered as much younger. Based on the rate of vanillin loss, Rogers calculated the main body of the shroud wasn't 700 years old. It was likely between 1,300 and 3,000 years old. That places it squarely in the timeline of the 1st century. The plot thickened in 2019. For decades, the raw data from the 1,988 tests was kept private. But after a legal request forced its release, a team led by Tristan Casabianca analyzed the numbers in the journal Archaeometry. They found that the data was not homogeneous. In plain English, the numbers didn't make sense together. The radiocarbon dates from the subsamples weren't consistent. They showed a trend where the dates got younger as you moved across the strip. This is exactly what you would see if you were cutting across a gradient where original fabric mixes with a repair patch. The statistical analysis screamed that the sample was chemically different from the rest of the cloth. So, if carbon dating is destructive and controversial, how do we find the truth? We need new eyes. We need technology that doesn't burn the evidence. Enter Dr. Liberato De Caro and his team at Italy's Institute of Crystallography. They bypassed carbon dating entirely and used a method called wide-angle X-ray scattering, or WAX. Instead of counting isotopes, WAXS looks at the structural integrity of the cellulose itself. Think of the linen fiber like a building. Over centuries, the internal beams and supports the cellulose chains begin to break down and alter their alignment. Waxes measures that microscopic structural decay. In a 2022 study, DeCaro's team hit a thread of the shroud with X-rays. They compared the decay pattern to linen samples from known historical eras. The shroud's structure didn't match the medieval samples at all. Instead, it was a fully compatible match with a linen sample taken from the siege of Masada in Israel, which is historically dated to between 55 and 74 AD. Let that sink in. The X-ray structural analysis points directly to the era of Christ. And it's not alone. In 2013, Professor Giulio Fanti used infrared and Raman spectroscopy methods that analyze molecular vibrations, and his results triangulated a date range from 300 BC to 400 AD. We now have multiple, independent, non-destructive testing methods that all contradict the 1988 result and point to an ancient origin. This changes the landscape entirely. We are no longer looking at a proven fake. We are looking at a scientific war zone. On one side, a single 1988 test on a dubious peripheral sample. On the other, chemical analysis, statistical audits, and cutting-edge X-ray dating that all scream antiquity. The Shroud of Turin has gone from a closed case to one of the most profound open mysteries of our time. The Catholic Church, for its part, remains cautious. They have never officially declared the shroud to be the authentic burial cloth of Jesus, preferring to call it a mirror of the gospel. They are playing the long game. But for those of us looking at the data, the question hangs heavy in the air. If the image isn't a painting, if the blood is real human blood, which studies have shown it is, and if the cloth is truly 2,000 years old, then what are we looking at? This brings us to you. Does this new evidence shatter the medieval verdict in your mind, or do you trust the 1988 labs? This debate is far from over, and we want to hear your theory in the comments below. If you want to keep exploring the edges of history and science with us, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.